Hello, Alchemists, and welcome back to LabTech episode 2. Today, we're going to take you through some background of what programmatic advertising is. This is going to be a two-parter. So the first part, we're going to be talking about the legacy AdTech industry. And in part 2, we're going to be talking about how Alkimi is completely different and revolutionary to that industry. So to kick things off, I guess we will start with the publisher side, my kind of preferred side of the coin, as it were. Having worked at Condé Nast, I was introduced to programmatic advertising and really saw how a big publisher like that really struggled to get to grips with digital, let alone automated buying and selling through programmatic. So I guess we should probably define what publishers are. I mean, Condé Nast is a great example of a very legacy publisher, which started off printing magazines. They owned a lot of other publications as well through advanced publications, but there are other types of publishers as well. So we talk a lot now about CTV, which is kind of the hot new thing. But essentially that is TV advertising through a app on your device.
Connected TV.
Yeah, yes. Connected TV. Yeah, sorry, using acronyms already. So that's kind of more of a traditional broadcaster in that sense. There's also audio. And so there's like a vast mix when we talk about publishers. It's kind of anyone supplying content essentially that users might read or watch or listen to.
Absolutely. So let's term publishers as anybody who provides content, and along with that content are advertisements. So they really provide the real estate on which the advertisements are shown. Let's keep that as the terminology for publishers in very simple terms.
Yeah, we often refer to those ad units as inventory. So that is what they are essentially selling to an advertiser on the other side through a vast web, an ecosystem that we're going to talk about as we go through this episode.
Absolutely. And when we talk about publishers, I think the problem started, I shouldn't start with the problem, but the speciality of the publishers was in generating content. They were not equipped with the technical know-how and the operational know-how on how to monetize that content, which is what led to so many different links in the supply chain where advertisements from the advertiser found their way all the way to the publisher's websites or the platform through multiple hops. And that is what we want to be talking about today, as to what those hops are, what their role in the ecosystem is, and where we are today.
Yeah, and I think in a very traditional sense, before automated buying and selling, there were just one-to-one relationships. So your publisher like Condé Nast would have a magazine that they printed themselves, and they were responsible for selling that advertising one-to-one with the media agency or the advertiser. Be same for a broadcaster. They would just sell that directly. There would be no need for any intermediaries in the middle. But that's not a very scalable solution, essentially, because as soon as digital came around, those magazine sales that might have been even in the millions would then be people just looking at a website whenever they wanted to. So those stopped being fixed pages in magazines, for example, or slots during a broadcast, and then they became live whenever anybody was on that site. So that's kind of where that kind of idea of real-time bidding comes in, right?
Absolutely. It's funny you should say that, because a close relative of mine used to work at a newspaper, and their advertising section was just this one lady at one table where people would come in and say, I want to place this ad. Here's how much I can afford to pay. And then she would say, okay, this is the size of the ad. This is where it goes. So we've moved on from those times to everything being programmatic, where when a user actually starts loading the content on a page, we have about 200 milliseconds for all the decision to be made on which ad to be shown to that user on that particular website. And that involves these players that we are talking about.
Yeah, so the publisher would have something called an ad server, which is where Google has made most of its money. It bought a company called DoubleClick in, I think, 1998, I want to say. Yes, and that really gave them quite a stranglehold on the publisher side. they got deeper and deeper on all the rest of it as well. And we'll go through that. But that's where they really kind of cut their teeth in the advertising world. So that allowed websites to hook up to an ad server and be able to inject an ad at any point that they wanted to onto the page. So that is kind of where the industry kind of started, but it has obviously since then got a lot more complex through that real-time bidding application that we're going to talk about.
Absolutely. The other player on the supply side are what we refer to as SSPs. And SSPs really are supply side platforms, where the SSP would enable the websites to run those campaigns or to run those, to maximize the revenue that they get out of their own ad inventory. They have their own value add in the legacy ad ecosystem, and they make it easier for the publishers to monetize their ad inventory.
So the supply side platform that we work with is something called prebid.js. But essentially that's built around something called OpenRTB, which is a widely used standard across the industry. It was invented, I guess, or published by the IAB quite a few years ago. There's been quite a few different iterations, and that defines what that bid object will look like. So when the inventory is available, it'll get turned into a bid object. That's right, isn't it?
Absolutely. And the need for the OpenRTB, and OpenRTB stands for real-time bidding. So if we look at the journey, we were talking about how newspaper ads used to be placed where people would go and say, here's an ad that I want to place, etc. And then as we move to the programmatic or move to digital advertising, there used to be direct deals between the publishers and the advertisers, or through certain intermediaries where they say, I need to show this many number of advertisements on this website. There's a direct deal between two parties, the supply side and the demand side being the advertiser. Then we moved on to a waterfall sort of a model where the website would say, okay, I have an ad slot here that I can show an ad on, and then who are the potential people that I can contact who would be interested in showing that ad? Let me contact party one. And how much is that? Is that party actually ready to show their ad on my website to this user? If not, I'll go to the second one. If not, the third one, and so on. So it used to be a waterfall model where you would probably accept the second offer, while if you had waited for the fourth person or the fourth party, you could possibly have made a lot more money. So that was a problem with that waterfall model. Now, the way this was resolved was by real-time bidding, where the publisher would say, here's an ad slot on my webpage, and my webpage serves content of a certain type. Who are all the people who are willing to show their ads on my website to this potential user? And then there would be a real-time bidding or an auction process, and the winner of that auction would then be able to show their ad to that user on that website. So that's what OpenRTB actually enabled in the digital advertising world.
Yeah, when I first started at Condé Nast, there was a waterfall in place. That was like 2014, so it's like 10 years ago now. So it's quite an old way of doing things, and it wasn't even that new then, but it did create a lot of problems for me as the programmatic salesperson, because I was the bottom of the waterfall. So I was effectively selling what was remnant inventory, which hadn't been sold by the direct teams or what have you, or any other third parties they might have been working with. Get into some of those in a bit, but it meant that there might be somebody selling it cheaper above me. So there was always this problem where the print team would sell a half page in a magazine, but because that was their legacy business and that's what they knew more about, they might sell that for, say, £35,000 or something. And then they would give away the same amount in added value online. So that just meant that I couldn't sell those impressions for actual money because they'd already given them away for free. But because they were above me in the waterfall, that meant that we didn't have the opportunity to monetize it. And in times like December, when it's like very, very busy on the sites, that started to become a bit of a nightmare, because I'd have something like £1 million booked for December, and then I'd only be able to get away with maybe a quarter of it. So that was always a bit of a problem, bit of a bugbear within the team. That.
Yeah, so I think OpenRTB did resolve quite a few problems with problems like the one you describe, and it was a step forward from the traditional waterfall model.
So yeah, within that as well, within that kind of waterfall model, or as well as SSPs, publishers might be integrated with things called ad networks, which are effectively a way of somebody collecting that inventory and then dissecting it into different buckets. It might be that they work with 20 publishers who all have sports content, but they might also have general news content. And then they will sell a vertical of that sports content against multiple titles. So it's kind of a slightly different model, but it would be a way of kind of aggregating your inventory with other publishers.
Exactly. Aggregating inventory on the supply side, not limited to just one publisher, but it could be multiple publishers that this particular ad network works with. That's true. And that would make it easier for the advertisers to actually identify inventory that they want to put their advertisements on.
And the sort of third part of that, which also sits within the programmatic sort of space, and you'll hear people talk about it quite a lot within the industry, is something called a PMP, which is a private marketplace. And essentially that allows a publisher to curate their own inventory. So to use Condé Nast as another example, just because I worked there, but we had 8 different titles, but some of those titles had common themes within them. So we had GQ, we had Ars Technica, and those were kind of male focused sites. So you might put a PMP together of male targeted inventory across the whole portfolio, which kind of allowed you to sell some less premium inventory, maybe. Not saying that Ars Technica was less premium, but GQ was very high value. So it meant that you could get the remnant inventory from GQ and you could bucket it together with Wired or Ars Technica to hit that audience that somebody might be looking for. And it kind of gives you a chance to kind of give you more scale across, like, again, your own chosen verticals rather than aggregating them with other people's sites.
Absolutely. So just looking at all the different players on the supply side, it is quite a crowded ecosystem just on the supply side, with the publishers, the ad networks, the curation platforms, the supply side platforms. There's a lot going on. Do you really think this is the most efficient way? Sure.
Well, I mean, there's kind of ways of looking at it because there's so much inventory available. You kind of have to have multiple buying options for people. But at the same time, it does create, when we're trying to get an ad on a page in 200th of a millisecond, it means that you have to have that decision making happen very quickly. A lot of this delays that. And this is where you got into problems with things like viewability, which isn't the real word, but essentially means that that the inventory needed to be in view on page at any one time. And what could happen is that if it takes too long to load that ad, it might never be seen by a human. That's because true. The person's already scrolled past it on the page.
Absolutely. And I think that's the whole point of advertising, where the ad needs to be shown to a person who is likely to buy that product. And if the ad is not loaded before the user just scrolls down the page, then there's no point in going through all of this processing, all of the supply chain, in trying to show an ad, but missing the train.
Yeah.
So to say.
Yeah, that's very true. So once the SSP has done its thing, that's where the kind of exchange element comes in. So we're using pre-bids on the supply side. There are other partners who do that, people like Magnite, Programmatic, whoever else. But the exchange is kind of where the sort of the advertiser and the publisher kind of meet in the middle, right?
That's true. So the ad exchange is really the matchmaker between the supply side and the demand side. And it's the ad exchange which actually conducts the auctions and selects the response which maximizes the revenue to the publisher. And the supply side platform may choose to work with multiple ad exchanges. And it then aggregates the best response from each of the ad exchanges, and then it conducts a second level auction. Like, for example, Prebid does that on what we refer to as Prebid servers. And we've spoken about Prebid servers before in some of our tech talks as well. The Prebid server conducts a second level auction, and the winner of the second level auction is then passed on to the publisher so that the winning auction, advertisement can be shown to the user. So not only are we conducting one auction on the ad exchange, but there's a potential second level auction that can be conducted on the supply side before the ad is shown to the user.
So we've just mentioned the exchange being the matchmaker in the middle, but it gets its information from the demand side platform, the DSP, exactly, which is where advertisers and more commonly media agencies will actually place their bids. So do you want to talk a bit about kind of where the DSP comes in and how it actually functions?
Sure. If you have to talk about the DSP, maybe we need to go slightly further right on the supply chain. And let me start with the advertiser. So the advertiser is anybody who wants to advertise their product on multiple in multiple formats on different portals, whether they are on websites, whether they are on mobile apps, whether they are on connected TV, AVOD platforms. There are a plethora of avenues for these advertisements to be shown on. But typically, the advertisers don't work directly with the publishers. They can in terms of private deals, but generally that is not what happens. The advertisers would prefer to go to what we refer to as media agencies. And these media agencies are people who advise the advertisers on setting up a campaign so as to meet their business goals. Like, for example, the advertiser, let's say in this case, Coca-Cola comes to a media agency and says, we're launching a new product and this is targeted for people between 18 to 25. And we are launching this in the next 3 months. We want to launch this, let's say, in summer. We want to target the hot climate, and we want to launch this in these many geographies. And they have a spec that they give to the media agencies. And looking at all of that information, the media agency would devise a strategy so as to get the maximum number of eyeballs on that particular product. And that would involve multiple avenues of advertising. It could involve advertising on websites. It could involve advertising on connected TV, on print media, on hoardings. It could involve a combination of all of this. So what these media agencies would do is, in order to run those programmatic campaigns, and the campaign itself is set up by these media agencies based on these parameters that are agreed between the media agency and the advertiser. They would go on to what are referred to as demand side platforms and set up these campaigns. And as part of those campaigns, the media agency would say, look, here's the product. Here are the websites that we want to target based on the type of content that they offer. Here are the segments of people that we want to target as part of this advertising campaign. Here is the budget that we want to allocate to that campaign. Here are the number of impressions that we want to achieve as part of this campaign. Here's how we want to space that campaign. That is, if my budget is, let's say, $1 million, I don't want to be spending $1 million in a day. I want to pace the campaign so that the $1 million lasts for, let's say, 3 months. And then they would also specify what is the maximum number of impressions that they are willing to deliver on a daily basis. Do they want to deliver more impressions at a certain part of the day when they get the maximum eyeballs? Do they want to deliver the maximum number of impressions, an increased number of impressions over the weekend when more people are likely to be watching? What are the times of days when they are willing to bid a little higher in order to reach the kind of people that they want to, that are most likely to buy their product, and so on and so forth? So the demand side platform allows the media agencies and the advertisers and anybody who's buying media really to be able to set up those campaigns and target the product to people that that are likely to buy the product.
Yeah, no, I always like to use the analogy for the media agency of people have probably watched Mad Men, which is a very old school version of an ad agency where the media agency actually was part of the ad agency. So the Don Draper role is the very sexy role of coming up with the copy for the advert, like what it's going to look like, how it's going to be produced. And that's the bit that is the main part of that show. But there is a media agency within that who essentially makes sure that advert is seen by the right people at the right time in order for them to be influenced by it, which I kind of think is one of those things that falls between the cracks when people think about advertising, because everybody might talk about, an advert during the Super Bowl and how great it is, but it's like the media agency is the one that actually books that ad in the Super Bowl. But there is a whole ad agency who makes a creative that makes it really cool and memorable and all the rest of it. So it's quite an interesting kind of dynamic that the media agencies split out from the ad agencies. They're kind of all under the same umbrella still, but sit as separate businesses because they have a very special set of skills around Absolutely. Understanding audiences, when people might be viewing different programs, like the different formats that they might need to use, the different media channels that they might want to go through. And that's quite a lot for an advertiser themselves to have in-house, yes. Right? So they might have a view over what their brand messaging is and how their brand is perceived by people, but they won't necessarily know any of those intricacies because that is why media agencies exist. And they do it across multiple advertisers, which mean they aggregate those skills across all of those different things. And it really means that the advertiser kind of should get the kind of best in class kind of media targeting, really.
Absolutely. And these DSPs, or demand side platforms as we call them, they are the ones who receive requests from the ad exchanges. And these requests include information such as what is the ad format that can be shown on the publisher's website? What is the content type that is associated with that website? What is the segment that the user who's likely to watch that ad, what kind of segment does that person fall under? So all of this information is received by the DSP via the ad exchange, and that is what we refer to as a bid object. And based on all the information that is contained in that bid object and the parameters that are defined as part of that campaign, the budget that's allocated, the impression targets, the spacing rules, all of that is brought together by the DSP in determining what is the best price that the DSP, in this case, the advertiser via the media agency, via the DSP, is willing to pay in order to show that particular advertisement to that user on that website. And once that decision is made, that response, we call it the bid response object, is sent back to the ad exchange. And the ad exchange collates all of these various bid response objects from the various DSPs that it is connected to. Then the ad exchange would collate them and conduct an auction and say, here's the response that is of the maximum value, which is then sent back to the SSP for a second level auction.
And I guess it's probably a good time to talk about how that decision making takes place, because below the DSP, it's connected to a lot of other things which help it make that decision. So we often talk about targeting within media because you want to know that you're hitting the precise audience that you want to hit. And so within the DSP, there will be options for the media agency to target via different DMPs, which is a demand side platform.
Data management platform.
A DMP, which is a data management platform. And that means that they can understand more about the user who's looking at the website.
Absolutely. So this, again, falls under all of the privacy regulations. So what generally happens is every user or every potential user is actually associated with an ID. And these IDs are generated by, again, another third party. It could be an ID provider, let's call them. And the user who is likely to be watching the ad is associated with an ID. And that ID is passed as part of that bid object all the way from the publisher to the SSP, to the ad exchange, then to the DSP. And what the DSP does is it works with the ID provider, who also works with what we call a DMP, or a data management platform. And the ID can be viewed as a primary key in a table. So associated with that ID is a certain number of segments. And each of those segments have specific meaning. So I might say, Chandru has an ID 1234, and that 1234 ID is passed as part of the bid object. When it reaches the DSP would share that ID, which is 1234, with the DMP, and that DMP would associate ID 1234 with segment ABC, segment XYZ, segment PQRS, right? Now, what is ABC, what is XYZ will be known to the DSP and to the DMP. Segment ABC may be a male who is resident in London in such and such a postcode, or driving such a car, or it's the likelihood that this person is very likely to be in this segment. So if that advert were to be for a car, and if the segment says that here's a person who's likely to be looking for another car, or likely to be looking to upgrade a car, or whatsoever, then this advertisement may be a good advertisement to show to this user, because he or she actually falls in this particular segment. And that decision, that association of that user to an ID, to a certain set of segments, is what the DMP actually allows the DSP to do. And as part of the campaign setup on the DSP, the media agency would say, here are the segments that I want to define, and I want these segments to be associated with my campaign. So if the DSP were to receive a bid object, a bid request object, which translates to a user within that segment, then the DSP would bid higher to show that advertisement to that user. But if that user is not a part of the segment of interest, then the DSP would bid lower. So that's how value is associated with a user based on their likelihood of buying the product that is being advertised.
Nice. And it feels like a good time to bring in cookies at that point, because we talk about that a lot. There's a lot in the news about the deprecation of third-party cookies, who's using them for what, where, why, how much of that is personally identifiable information. But essentially, the cookie is what tracks people when they're browsing online. And that is what is then used to determine a lot of that information that is occurring in the DMP, that the DSP will use to make that decision, right?
Exactly. So a cookie is, it can be viewed very simply as a file that is put on a user's device. And that file is actually updated every time the user moves through the internet, browsing different sites, consuming different content, and so on. So that information is what is passed on, is what is used in order to make a decision about the likelihood of a user to buy a certain product, and hence the advertisement that needs to be shown to that particular user. So it all falls under the privacy regulations. We need to be mindful of collecting information and storing information without proper user consent. And that is a very sensitive topic. And everybody in the ad ecosystem is very sensitive towards what information is collected, how it is stored, how it is deleted, how long it is retained, and what are the purposes for which we can use this information. Which is, and again, there are two types of cookies, the first party cookies and the third party cookies. The first party cookies are those cookies which are dropped onto the user's devices by the website that user is visiting. So if I log into a particular website with my username and password, and I have provided as part of my user preferences certain personal information, that can be used as first party cookies. But there are other third parties that may partner with that website and may be allowed by the website through user consent to track the user's actions. And those third-party cookies may not actually track who the user is or their personal information, but just by tracking what actions they are taking on a certain website, what websites these people are visiting, what are they buying, what type of content they are consuming, there's a lot of information that they can gather, which can then be used to determine what is the best advertisement to show to that user.
And this is another area where Google has really taken a stranglehold on the kind of industry, because they own a DSP that's very popular. They also own Chrome, which is a very popular browser. Incidentally, third-party cookies aren't available in Safari, so that does mean that virtually half of all devices aren't really being tracked via cookies at the moment. But the cookie has allowed them to essentially give value to a lot of inventory, a lot of long-tail inventory on not necessarily premium publishers, and package it up and sell it in a certain way, which has made them as big as they are today.
Absolutely, and Google is proposing what we call the what they're referring to as the Google Privacy Sandbox, and there are certain issues and concerns that have been raised on the Google Privacy Sandbox, which provides Google more of a stranglehold on the digital advertising industry. It remains to be seen where all of that leads to, but at least for now, they've just postponed the deprecation of third-party cookies by another year. It's anybody's guess as to where that will lead to.
Yeah, I think it's probably the third or fourth year that they've delayed it. So it's maybe been 4 years since they said they were going to do it, at least. But yeah, I guess because they have, $160 billion a year through advertising they need to protect, that's probably why they're not doing it, because they haven't come up with a good solution yet. But we'll get on to kind of possible solutions, I think, in part two. But yeah, I think that generally kind of wraps up what we were going to talk about today. But what I think is kind of the sort of take home from all of this is that the kind of very manual process on the end that is done by the advertiser and the media agency in order to automate buying, which is kind of the squidgy human interface part on one side, I guess. And all of this is designed essentially to allow multiple buyers the opportunity to buy across multiple parts of the internet through different inventory, different ad formats. So it's really trying to connect as much supply to as much demand as possible. But that system has existed for quite a long time now. So the kind of system that we're talking about is over 10 years old, probably more like 15 really, in various guises. But nobody has really built something brand new. What they've really gone and done is tack bits onto the side of stuff that already exists to make the inventory more targetable, to make it worth more, to segment it in different ways, to sell it to different people. And all of those things has kind of made it more accessible, but also kind of made it a lot messier as well. And within that, the publisher sits at the one end and they're the ones who get the dollars from the advertiser. But once it's gone through the kind of meat grinder of the programmatic advertising ecosystem, a lot of the value that they should be getting has been lost to a lot of these third parties.
Absolutely. There have been multiple studies that have been conducted which talk about the issues of the legacy digital advertising ecosystem. And we've spoken about the issues around the lack of transparency, inefficient supply chain, and the increased costs and the increased emissions that are resulting due to these inefficiencies. I look forward to the second part where we talk about how we are dealing with those issues and what solution we have come up with in order to clean up the digital advertising ecosystem.
Yeah, so check out part two in the description.